Captain Jake Morrison walked through the long hallway toward the council chambers. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. He had been to this place many times before, but today felt different. Today the air seemed heavy with something he could not name. The Galactic Council building stretched high above him like a mountain made of glass and steel. Ships from dozens of worlds hung in the space around it like metal flowers. Jake had always thought it looked beautiful, but now it just looked cold. Ambassador Lisa Carter waited for him at the entrance to the main chamber. Her face was pale, and her hands shook just a little. She had been Earth's voice in this place for 15 years. She knew these aliens better than almost any human alive. "They have made their choice," she said to Jake as he approached. "The vote happened an hour ago. It was not close." Jake nodded, but said nothing. He had expected this day for months. The signs had been clear to anyone who cared to look. The other species in the council had grown tired of humanity. They called humans too violent and too quick to act. They said humans did not think before they moved. The great doors opened with a sound like thunder. Jake and Lisa walked into the chamber where 47 different alien species sat in judgment of humanity. The room was huge and round, with seats rising up like steps in a stadium. At the center stood a platform where humans had stood many times to speak for their people. Chancellor Zarian of the Zephyrians rose from his seat. He was tall and thin, with skin that looked like crystal. When light hit him, he threw rainbows across the walls. His voice was musical but cold when he spoke. "The Council has reached its decision regarding the human species and their place in galactic society," he said. The words echoed in the vast chamber. "After careful consideration of evidence presented over many months, we have concluded that humanity poses a threat to the peaceful order we have worked so hard to build." Jake felt Lisa tense beside him, but neither of them spoke. They had come here to listen, not to argue. The time for arguments had passed. "Humans solve problems with violence when patience would serve better," Zarian continued. "They expand too quickly into space that belongs to others. They question laws that have kept peace for thousands of years. They refuse to accept the wisdom of species far older than themselves." Around the chamber, other aliens nodded their agreement. The Altarians, with their blue-scaled skin, hummed in harmony. The vegan delegates flashed patterns of light from the crystals in their foreheads. The massive Centaurians rumbled deep sounds that Jake felt in his chest. "Therefore," Zarian said, "the Council votes to remove humanity from all treaties and agreements. Human ships will no longer dock at Council stations. Human merchants will not trade in Council space. Human soldiers will not serve in Council forces. Earth and all human colonies are hereby quarantined from galactic society until such time as humanity learns to behave in a civilized manner." The vote appeared on screens around the chamber. 47 species had voted. 0 had voted to keep humanity in the Council. Even the Rigelians, who had been friends to Earth for decades, had voted against them. Jake looked at the numbers and felt something change inside him. It was not anger exactly, and not sadness either. It was something colder and harder. The galaxy had rejected humanity. Fine. Humanity would remember that Dr. Alex Bennett sat in his laboratory on Earth 3 days later, reading the reports from the Council session. He had predicted this outcome in papers he had written years ago. Humans were different from the other species in ways that went deeper than just culture. Most alien species had evolved slowly and carefully. They had learned to think for long periods before acting. They built consensus and moved as groups. They valued stability above all else. Humans had evolved as hunters and survivors. They made quick decisions and adapted fast to new situations. They took risks that other species would never consider. They valued progress more than safety. The Council had tried to make humans act like everyone else, and humans had tried to fit in. But it had never really worked. The two sides had been moving toward this break. For decades, Alex picked up his communication device and sent a message to his contacts throughout human space. The message was simple and direct. Protocol 7 is now active. Begin immediate preparation for full independence. Commander Kate Williams received the message while she was packing her belongings on Station Harmony. The station orbited New Geneva and served as headquarters for joint human and alien military operations. Or it had until 3 days ago. Kate had served with aliens for 12 years. She had fought beside Altarians in the border wars and had saved the lives of Centaurian civilians during the Vega crisis. She had thought they were friends and allies. But when the recall orders came, the alien officers she had worked with for years suddenly would not meet her eyes. They spoke to her in formal voices and used her rank instead of her name. Overnight she had become a stranger to them. Kate sealed the last of her equipment cases and looked around the quarters that had been her home for 2 years. The walls were bare now, except for marks where her pictures had hung. She had taken down the photos of herself with alien friends and unit members. Looking at them hurt too much. A soft knock came at her door. Kate opened it to find the commander, Zeph, standing in the hallway. Zeph was an Altarian with scales that shifted from blue to green depending on his mood. Right now, they were a dull gray that meant sadness or regret. Kate, he said quietly, I wanted to say goodbye, and to tell you that not all of us agreed with the council's decision. Kate looked at her old friend and felt tired. But you did not vote against it either, she said. Zeph's scales darkened. My government made the choice for all Altarians. I had no say in the matter. There is always a choice, Zeph, Kate replied. You chose to follow orders instead of standing with friends. I understand why you did it, but that does not make it hurt less. She picked up her cases and walked past him toward the transport dock. She did not look back. General Ryan Hayes stood in the command center on Earth, watching displays that showed human forces throughout the galaxy. Red dots marked units that were already returning to human space. Yellow dots showed units still in transit. Green dots marked the few units that had not yet received their orders. The withdrawal was happening faster than anyone had expected. Human commanders were not waiting for detailed instructions or asking for clarification. They were simply packing up and leaving. Within a week, every human soldier, sailor, and marine would be back in human-controlled space. Ryan felt proud of how quickly his people were responding, but he also felt something else. The aliens had made a mistake. They thought they were punishing humanity by casting them out. They thought humans needed the Council more than the Council needed humans. We're about to learn how wrong they were. Dr. Michelle Torres sat in her office deep inside the Human Research Consortium building on Mars. Outside her window, the red planet stretched to the horizon under a pale sky. She had lived here for 8 years and had grown to love the quiet beauty of this world. On her desk lay a single folder marked with symbols that few humans had ever seen. Protocol Omega had been created years ago as a safeguard that everyone hoped would never be needed. Now Michelle held the authorization codes that would change everything. She opened her communication system and sent out a priority message to every human research facility in known space. The message was short and used words that would mean nothing to anyone listening in. The library is closing early today. Please return all borrowed materials immediately. Within hours, human scientists began shutting down shared databases and research projects. Information that had flowed freely between human and alien researchers for decades suddenly stopped. Computer systems that had been open to Council scientists went dark. Laboratories that had welcomed alien visitors closed their doors. The reaction was immediate. Dr. Yenth of the Rigel Science Academy tried to access the human quantum computing research that his team had been working on for 3 years. The system told him his access had been revoked. He called his human colleague Dr. Sarah Kim, but found that her communication line had been disconnected. On Vega Prime, the alien industrial complex that produced consumer goods for half the galaxy, discovered that they could no longer contact their human suppliers. The manufacturing techniques that humans had shared freely were suddenly protected by security systems that no one could break. Michelle watched the reports coming in from around the galaxy and felt a cold satisfaction. The aliens had thought they could simply cast humanity aside and continue to benefit from human knowledge and innovation. They were learning how much they had taken for granted. The economic impact began within days. Trade Coordinator Nathan Cole monitored the situation from his office on Earth. Nathan had spent his career building the trade networks that connected human colonies to the wider galaxy. He knew better than anyone how much the galactic economy depended on human participation. The Epsilon Arigani trade route collapsed first. Human colonies had provided fuel and supplies for ships traveling between the inner and outer systems. Without those way stations, the journey became too expensive for most merchants. Cargo ships that had made the run for decades suddenly stopped. Flying. The manufacturing sector was hit even harder. Human factories had specialized in producing components that required precision and reliability. Other species could make similar products, but not as quickly or as cheaply. Production lines throughout Council space began shutting down as they ran out of essential parts. Nathan received dozens of calls from alien trade officials asking when the disruption would end. He answered each call politely and told them that he had no information to share. When they pressed him for details, he simply said that humanity was focusing on internal matters for the foreseeable future. Admiral Susan Wright took command of the human defense fleet on a gray morning when Earth's sky was filled with clouds. She had served in joint operations with alien forces for 20 years and had always followed Council military protocols. Those days were over now. The fleet that assembled under her command was different from anything that had existed before. Human ships that had been restricted to Council-approved designs and weapons were finally free to use their full capabilities. Scientists and engineers who had been forced to work within alien safety guidelines could now build whatever they thought would work best. The first new ship design came from the yards around Jupiter. The vessel looked nothing like the standardized Council ships that filled most fleets. It was smaller and faster, with weapons that could be configured for different missions. Most importantly, it could operate independently for months without needing to dock at a major station. Susan stood on the bridge of the prototype ship and felt something she had not experienced in years: freedom. For 2 decades she had commanded ships that were designed by committee and built to satisfy political requirements. This ship existed for one purpose: only to protect humanity and serve human interests. The aliens noticed the changes quickly. Council observers who had monitored human military developments for years suddenly found themselves locked out of human facilities. Intelligence reports that had flowed both ways for decades stopped coming. Ships that had operated under joint command simply disappeared from Council tracking systems. Captain Chris Parker received his new orders while the ship was refueling at a human station near the galactic rim. The orders were simple: explore regions that the Council had declared off limits and establish contact with any civilizations he might find. Chris had always wanted to push beyond the boundaries that the Council had set for exploration. The aliens claimed that certain regions of space were too dangerous for colonization, but Chris suspected that they simply wanted to keep those areas for themselves. Now he would find out the truth. His ship, the Independence, was one of the new designs that could travel farther and faster than anything the Council had ever built. Its crew was entirely human, and they shared an excitement about the mission that Chris had rarely seen in joint operations. They jumped to their first destination 3 days later. The system contained 7 planets orbiting a star that was older than Earth's sun. Council surveys had labeled it as hostile to life, but Chris's sensors showed something very different. The 3rd planet showed signs of advanced civilization. Cities covered 2 continents, and orbital structures surrounded the world like metal rings. Someone lived here, and they had technology that was clearly beyond what the Council possessed. Chris ordered his crew to approach slowly and broadcast standard greeting messages. The response came within minutes, not in the Council's common language, but in perfect English. "Welcome, human explorers," the voice said. "We have been waiting for you to find us." Back in Council space, the problems continued to mount. Without human peacekeepers, several border disputes had turned into active conflicts. The efficient human logistics networks that had kept supplies flowing smoothly were gone, leaving shortages on dozens of worlds. Council members who had voted so confidently to expel humanity began to realize what they had lost. The humans had not just been another member species. They had been the backbone that held much of galactic civilization together. President Helen Murphy of Earth received her first official communication from a Council member 4 weeks after the expulsion vote. The message came from Chancellor Zarian himself, and it was carefully worded to sound like a routine diplomatic inquiry. Helen read it twice, then deleted it without responding. The galaxy had made its choice. Now humanity would make theirs. On Mars, Dr. Michelle Torres looked at the latest reports from human exploration teams. They had found 17 new civilizations in regions the Council claimed were empty. They had discovered resources that would make humanity wealthy beyond imagination. They had learned technologies that would revolutionize human society. The aliens had thought they were punishing humanity by forcing them into isolation. Instead, they had set humanity free to reach its full potential. Michelle smiled as she filed the reports. The galaxy was about to discover what humans could accomplish when no one was holding them back. Colonel Danny Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his ship, watching a new world spin slowly beneath them. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded him of Earth. According to Council records, this system was uninhabitable and too dangerous for settlement. The Council had been wrong about many things. Danny's sensors showed breathable air-rich soil and plenty of fresh water on the planet's surface. There were no signs of the radiation storms or toxic atmospheres that Council reports had warned about. This world could easily support millions of human colonists. "Begin landing preparations," Danny told his crew. "We have found our new home." This was the 12th world that human exploration teams had surveyed in the past 6 months. All of them had been marked as dangerous or worthless in Council databases. All of them had turned out to be perfect for human settlement. Danny had begun to suspect that the Council had deliberately lied about these systems to keep them for future alien expansion. The aliens had wanted humanity to stay in the crowded inner systems where they could be watched and controlled. Engineer Amy Foster worked 16-hour days in the shipyards orbiting Proxima Centauri. Around her, dozens of new human ships took shape unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. These vessels were built for independence and exploration, not for following Council regulations. The new ships were smaller than the massive cruisers that alien fleets preferred, but they were also faster and more adaptable. They could land on planetary surfaces to gather resources or hide from enemies. They could operate for years without returning to a base for supplies or repairs. Amy had spent years dreaming of designs like these, but Council safety rules had made them impossible to build. Alien engineers insisted on redundant systems and standardized components that made ships expensive and slow. Human engineers preferred elegant solutions that did more with less. The prototype ship that Amy was finishing looked like a metal bird with swept-back wings and a sleek hull. It could carry a crew of 50 people to the edge of the galaxy, and keep them alive for 2 years. More importantly, it could defend itself against threats that Council ships could never handle. Amy ran her hand along the ship's hull and felt pride in what she had created. This vessel represented everything that humans could accomplish when they were free to innovate without alien oversight. Captain Chris Parker's second contact with the remnant civilizations took place in orbit around a gas giant in an unnamed system. The beings who came aboard his ship looked almost human, but their eyes held knowledge that seemed older than stars. "We withdrew from galactic politics long before your species learned to make fire," their leader explained. His name was unpronounceable in human languages, so Chris simply called him Guide. "We grew tired of the endless committees and debates that prevented real progress." Guide showed Chris holographic displays of technologies that made current galactic. Science looked primitive. Ships that could travel between dimensions. Weapons that could reshape matter at the atomic level. Communication systems that worked instantly across unlimited distances. "The Council species fear progress," Guide continued. "They prefer the safety of known methods over the risks of innovation. That is why they have remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years while we have continued to evolve." Chris studied the displays with growing excitement. These technologies could revolutionize human civilization and give humanity advantages that no other species possessed. But he had to ask the obvious question. "Why are you willing to share this knowledge with us?" Chris said. Guide smiled for a moment. He looked remarkably human. "Because you remind us of ourselves when we were younger. You have the courage to explore and the wisdom to adapt. The Council species have forgotten how to do either." Dr. Rachel Green brushed dirt away from the carved stone surface and felt her heart race with excitement. The symbols beneath her hands were older than human civilization, and they told a story that would change everything. The ruins on Kepler 442b had been discovered by accident when a human mining team had followed unusual energy readings deep underground. What they found was a vast complex of buildings and machinery left behind by a species that the human scientists had begun calling the predecessors. Rachel had been studying ancient civilizations for 20 years, but nothing had prepared her for this discovery. The predecessors had possessed technology that was so advanced it seemed like magic. They had built machines that still functioned after millions of years and left behind warnings carved in stone that would survive until the end of time. The warnings were clear once Rachel learned to read the symbols. Something was coming from beyond the galaxy's edge, something that had destroyed the predecessors despite all their advanced technology. The stone carvings showed creatures of living darkness that consumed entire star systems and converted matter into more of their kind. Rachel sent her translations to Earth immediately, but she also sent copies to the remnant civilizations that humans had recently contacted. The ancient beings confirmed her worst fears. The threat was real, and it was coming soon. President Helen Murphy sat in her office, reading reports from human colonies throughout known space. The news was better than anyone had dared to hope. Human settlements were thriving in regions that the Council had declared worthless. Trade between human worlds was growing rapidly without alien interference. More importantly, humans had made contact with civilizations that possessed knowledge and resources beyond anything available in Council space. These new allies were willing to share their technologies with humans in exchange for partnership and mutual defense agreements. Helen looked at the star charts that covered one wall of her office. Red markers showed human colonies that had existed before the Council expelled them. Blue markers showed new settlements that had been established in the past 6 months. The blue markers outnumbered the red ones by 3 to 1. The communication system on her desk chimed softly, indicating an incoming message from Council space. Helen glanced at the display and saw that it was another attempt by alien officials to open diplomatic discussions. She deleted the message without reading it, just as she had done with dozens of similar communications. The aliens had made their choice when they voted unanimously to expel humanity from galactic society. Now they would have to live with the consequences of that choice. Meanwhile, in Council space, the problems continued to multiply. Border conflicts that human peacekeepers had prevented for decades were breaking out across the galaxy. Trade routes that human logistics experts had managed were collapsing under their own inefficiency. Technologies that human researchers had developed were failing without proper maintenance. Council members who had voted so confidently to reject humanity were beginning to understand what they had lost. Humans had not just been another member, species among many. They had been the engineers and problem solvers who kept galactic civilization functioning smoothly, but it was too late for regrets. Humanity had moved beyond the need for council approval or support. They were building something new in the darkness between stars, something that would be stronger and more resilient than the old galactic order the council had thought they were, punishing humanity by forcing them into exile. Instead, they had unleashed human potential in ways that would reshape the galaxy forever. The first sign of the void swarm came from sensors on the galactic rim, where human monitoring stations watched the empty space between galaxies. Lieutenant Mark Johnson was on duty when the readings began showing impossible energy signatures. Moving through the darkness, Mark had been trained to recognize every known type of ship and energy weapon in the galaxy. But these readings matched nothing in human databases. The signatures were vast beyond imagination, and they moved in patterns that suggested intelligence, but not any kind of intelligence that Mark understood. He sent an immediate alert to Earth and to all human colonies in the outer systems. Within hours, every human facility in the galaxy was tracking the approaching signals. The readings grew stronger each day as whatever was creating them moved closer to inhabited space. Dr. Elena Martinez worked around the clock in her laboratory analyzing the sensor data. The energy patterns reminded her of the warnings that had been found in the predecessor ruins. Living darkness that consumed matter and converted it into more of itself. A force that existed partially outside normal space and time. The void swarm had awakened, and it was heading toward the galaxy exactly as the ancient warnings had predicted. Elena sent her analysis to the remnant civilizations and received confirmation of her worst fears. The threat was real, and it was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The first council worlds to be attacked were mining colonies on the galactic edge, far from the centers of power where the decision to exile humanity had been made. The attacks came without warning in the depths of space, where no one expected danger. The colony ship Altarian Dream had been traveling to establish a new settlement. When it encountered the swarm, the ship's final transmission lasted only 14 seconds before the signal cut off completely. When Council rescue ships arrived 3 days later, they found nothing but empty space where the colony ship had been. Commander Tony Lewis monitored the situation from a human listening post hidden in an asteroid field. His sensors tracked Council fleet movements as alien commanders tried to understand what had happened to their ships and colonies. The aliens were confused and frightened by an enemy they could not identify or comprehend. Tony had access to information, but the Council lacked. He knew what the Void Swarm was and how it operated. He understood that conventional weapons and tactics would be useless against entities that could phase through solid matter and existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But Tony said nothing to his former alien colleagues. Humanity had been cast out of galactic society, and the aliens had made it clear that they did not want human advice or assistance. Now they would face the consequences of their isolation. The swarm's attacks followed a pattern that became clear to human observers, even as it remained mysterious to Council forces. The entities targeted worlds with large populations first absorbing the life energy of billions of beings before moving on to consume the physical matter of planets and stars. Each successful attack made the swarm stronger and larger. The dark entities multiplied by converting matter into more of their kind, creating an ever-growing wave of destruction that swept through Council space like a plague. The Council's response was predictably bureaucratic. Emergency committees were formed to study the threat. Impact assessments were prepared to measure the economic damage. Diplomatic protests were drafted and sent to empty space in the hope that the swarm entities might be willing to negotiate. Chancellor Zarian called for calm and patience as Council fleets mobilized to defend their territory. The alien leaders assured their populations that the threat could be contained. Using proven military strategies and superior technology. They were wrong about everything. The first major battle between Council forces and the Void Swarm took place in the Vega system, where a Centaurian battle fleet had taken defensive positions around the inhabited worlds. Admiral Greth commanded 200 ships, including some of the most powerful vessels in the Council Navy. The battle lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, the entire Centaurian fleet had been destroyed without inflicting any measurable damage. On the swarm entities, Vega Prime and its 12 billion inhabitants were consumed, completely leaving behind only empty space, where a thriving civilization had existed for thousands of years. Battle Coordinator Curran Walsh analyzed the tactical recordings from the few Council ships that had managed to escape the massacre. The data confirmed what human scientists had predicted. Council weapons passed through the swarm entities without effect, while the dark beings could solidify it, will to destroy their targets. The aliens were fighting an enemy that followed no rules of physics that they understood. Their ships were designed for battles against other civilized species, not against forces of pure destruction that treated three-dimensional space as merely a suggestion. Meanwhile, in human space, a very different kind of preparation was taking place. Human forces had been studying predecessor technology and learning from the remnant civilizations for months. They understood what they were facing, and they had developed new weapons and tactics, specifically designed to fight entities that existed partially outside normal reality. The secret lay in combining predecessor science with remnant wisdom and human innovation. Where the Council forces used brute strength and conventional tactics, humans had learned to fight in ways that the galaxy had never seen before. Human ships could now fold space around themselves, making them nearly impossible to target. Human weapons fired through dimensional rifts, allowing them to strike enemies that were phased out of normal space. Human strategies treated the battlefield as a multidimensional puzzle rather than a simple contest of firepower. Admiral Susan Wright watched the reports from Council space with cold satisfaction. System after system fell to the swarm, while alien fleets were systematically destroyed by an enemy they could not understand or effectively fight. The beings who had voted unanimously to expel humanity from galactic society were now paying the price for their arrogance. They had rejected the one species that might have been able to help them, and now they faced extinction at the hands of an enemy beyond their comprehension. But Susan felt no sympathy for the aliens, who had cast humanity aside. The Council had made its choice when it decided that humans were too dangerous to be allowed in civilized society. Now humanity would make its own choices about who deserved to survive the coming darkness. As more Council worlds fell to the swarm, the alien leaders finally began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. They had expelled the one species that possessed the knowledge and capability to fight the ancient enemy. They had chosen isolation and superiority over cooperation and survival. The galaxy trembled as the Void Swarm consumed civilization after civilization. But in the darkness between stars, human forces prepared for a war that would determine the fate of all life in the galaxy. The species that had been rejected as too violent and unpredictable was about to become the galaxy's only hope for survival. Fleet Admiral Peter King stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching his fleet prepare for battle against an enemy that had already destroyed half the galaxy. Around him, 200 human ships moved in formations that would have been impossible for any other species to achieve. The ships themselves looked nothing like the standardized vessels that filled Council fleets. Each one had been designed specifically to fight the Void Swarm using technologies that the aliens had never imagined. They could phase between dimensions, fold space around themselves, and fire weapons that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Peter had been fighting the swarm for 3 months now, ever since humanity had finally decided to enter the war. The decision had not been easy. Many humans wanted to let the aliens face extinction as punishment for rejecting humanity. Others argued that allowing the swarm to consume the galaxy would ultimately threaten human worlds as well. In the end, President Helen Murphy had made the choice. Humanity would fight not to save the aliens who had cast them out, but to protect the future of all intelligent life in the galaxy. It was the right thing to do, even if the aliens did not deserve such mercy. The battle for Wolf 359 began when a massive swarm tendril emerged from dark space and headed directly toward the human colony that Dr. Samantha Bell had spent 5 years building. The colony housed 3 million people and served as a major research center for studying predecessor technology. Samantha had no intention of abandoning her life's work to the forces of darkness. Instead, she activated defensive systems that turned the entire star system into a trap designed specifically for entities that existed partially outside normal space. The swarm entities entered the system expecting to find easy prey. What they found instead was a carefully constructed maze of dimensional barriers and energy fields that forced them to solidify in normal space, where human weapons could destroy them. The battle lasted 14 hours and ended with the complete destruction of over 10,000 swarm entities. It was the first major victory against the dark forces, and it proved that humanity had learned how to fight an enemy that had seemed invincible. News of the victory spread quickly through both human and alien space. In council chambers that had been filled with despair for months, alien leaders suddenly began to hope that the war might not be lost after all. But their hope came with a bitter realization of how badly they had misjudged humanity. Chancellor Zarine of the Zephyrians called an emergency session of what remained of the Galactic Council. Fewer than 20 species still had representatives alive to attend the meeting. The rest had been consumed by the swarm or had fled to distant parts of the galaxy. "We must ask for human assistance," Zarian said to the assembled delegates. The words seemed to burn his throat as he spoke them. They are the only force that has proven capable of fighting these creatures effectively. The debate that followed was short and desperate. Some delegates argued that humanity would demand impossible terms for their help. Others worried that asking for aid would be seen as an admission of weakness. But in the end, fear won over pride. Formal request for assistance was transmitted to Earth 12 hours later. It was the first official communication between the Council and humanity since the expulsion vote that had driven humans from galactic society. Captain Lauren Gray received the honor of delivering humanity's response to the council chambers. She walked through the same halls where Jake Morrison had been rejected years earlier. But now the power balance had completely shifted. The chamber that had once held 47 different species now contained barely 20 delegates. Many seats sat empty, marking civilizations that no longer existed. The beings who remained looked tired and defeated by months of hopeless fighting. Lauren stood on the platform where humans had been judged and found wanting. Now she held the future of galactic civilization in her hands. The aliens who had cast humanity aside were begging for salvation from the very species they had rejected. "Humanity will help defend the galaxy against the Void Swarm," Lauren announced. Her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. "But the old council is finished. The age of committees and endless debates while civilizations burn is over." She activated a holographic display that showed the new structure humanity proposed. Our galactic government. It would be called the Galactic Federation, and it would be led by species that had proven their ability to protect civilization rather than those who simply talked about it. "Leadership will be earned through action, not through political maneuvering," Lauren continued. "Those who can fight the darkness will lead. Those who cannot will follow. There will be no more votes based on fear or prejudice." The alien delegates had no choice but to accept humanity's terms. Their fleets were destroyed, their worlds were burning, and their people were dying. Humanity offered the only hope of survival, and the aliens could not afford to reject it. The combined human-led fleets that assembled to push back the Void Swarm were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships worked alongside vessels from the remnant civilizations and the few council species that had survived the initial attacks, but it was clear to everyone involved that humanity was in charge. Human commanders made the tactical decisions. Human scientists provided the technology needed to fight effectively. Human diplomats negotiated the agreements that held the alliance together. The final battle against the main body of the Void Swarm took place at the galactic core, where the dark entities had been feeding on the massive black hole that anchored the spiral arms. The battle lasted 3 days and involved forces from dozens of species working under human command. When it was over, the swarm had been driven back into the darkness between galaxies. The threat was not eliminated completely, but it had been contained. For the foreseeable future, the galaxy was safe and civilization could begin to rebuild. In the aftermath of victory, the surviving alien species found themselves living in a very different galaxy. The old council with its endless bureaucracy and political games was gone forever. In its place stood the Galactic Federation led by humans, who had earned their authority through courage and competence. Some aliens resented the new order and mourned the loss of their former influence, but most were simply grateful to be alive. They had learned a harsh lesson about the value of cooperation over competition and the importance of respecting those who were different from themselves. Humanity had turned its back when the galaxy rejected them. But when the darkness came and all seemed lost, humanity had returned to save those who had cast them out. It was a display of character that impressed even the ancient remnant civilizations, who had thought they had seen everything. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating humanity, and humanity would never again allow fear and prejudice to divide the forces of civilization. When darkness threatened all life in the universe,